How's it going, folks? I'm just shooting a real brief intro to my Bannack video, and I wanted to let you guys know a couple things. One, my first YouTube video ever. It's going to be kind of ridiculous, and yeah, there's no script. There's certainly no script. Second part, I'm here actually at Garnet Ghost Town working. Because we're doing cabin stabilization. Part of the thing about being an archaeologist, sometimes you get roped into doing other cultural resource management work. That's just part of the game. Third thing, though, and I want to stress this, I do in the video note, or let people know that these sites on public land, state land, federal land, are protected. They're protected by the Antiquities Act. They're protected by the National Historic Preservation Act, the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It is illegal to take things from these sites. It's illegal to vandalize them, and it's illegal to purposely damage them. Please do your part. Enjoy these places. Learn about these places. But don't, notify somebody if you see damage being done, and try not to do damage yourself. Not saying that people who are watching this would, but it's a reminder. I work hard to help preserve these places and record these places for the enjoyment of you all and future generations. So again, thanks for watching. I apologize for how choppy it is, and hopefully I get better at doing video work. So cheers. So welcome to Main Street in Bannack. As you can see, it is quite a uniform little place. Yeah, remember, this was a rip-roaring wild time. In the 1860s and 70s, you'd liable to get shot for having an argument in a bar. Some of the nicest houses are right on the main drag here. Some of the houses, like that one there, were inhabited until the 1970s. I really could. There's the Mason's Hall. Whose house is this? Behind me, this L-shaped house is known as the Turner House because this is where the Turner family lived. Now, I found the Turners in the Bannack Cemetery when I was visiting earlier this morning. It's kind of crazy that I'm sure they had no idea that their little place was going to be part of an incredibly important historical resource. Going inside here, got your water damage from leaky roofs and years of neglect. Lath and plaster walls. It's actually a lovely open floor plan. Look at the heave of the floor. It's because when these structures were built, very rarely did they actually have a foundation. There might have been stones in each corner to support the corners of the house, with then logs underneath. I put my foot here, and the house creaks in that room. You can see how some of these parts of the house were just added on as the family grew. Bird's nest, nature taking everything back. Birds living in the chimney flue. There's the stone. Beautiful view out the doorway, or out the window here. Is there someone standing in the window of the meeting house there? The small wedge-shaped structure behind me is the assayer's office, and that is where gold ore would be tested to see its quality, using mercury to separate the gold out from the sands. You can kind of see that once again, the walls are squared. These logs have been squared off with an axe. Each individual line is an impact that cleaved it off. And despite the fact that it was all done by hand, it's pretty square. Not bad. Not bad for a place that's been here nearly 200 years, considering you could buy a house now that was built now and by the time your children go to high school, it's falling apart. Hold a ghost. Hey there, Coney. Hey there, Hassenpfeffer. As you look up the hill here, small miners' residences, single occupation units, small families. You know, the rich families live on Main Street. The lesser rich families live on the back streets of town. And give you an idea, I mean, so you understand how packed this place was. Here's a stove just sitting out in the middle of nowhere. Cast iron wood stove. Some of these structures, as you can see them lean, are in good condition. Some of them, not so much. Walking further up the hill here, you see stuff like this here where it's been for 100 years. It's the wagon axle. Structure is collapsing all over time because they can't be saved. Look at this. Someone's garage. Small horse-drawn plow. That's what's left of a two-wheeling cabriolet. Wow. As you can see, horse manure in the horse barn here. Multiple tools. There's a belt-driven grinding wheel. Rims for wagons. There's a harrow. This square thing is a harrow for dragging behind a horse. And your wagon wheels that go on that axle that's sitting way out yonder. A water pump head. Oil control valve. I don't know what that would be for. Any guesses? That's a washing machine. Old wheelbarrow frames. And you get in here and once again, you're seeing all the fine fittings of wagons and carriages. This cast iron piece right here is from a fold-up student school desk. This is your wagon's parts room. It's amazing how much still exists. I'm actually quite impressed at the amount of stuff that is still here. Remember, these places are protected resources. So don't take things. Keep them in situ. And yeah, I know some of it looks like junk, but you know what? It's still historically significant. And this is what I do. Not much grave robbing in a gold mining town. But you know, hey, one day people will look at my job and go, oh, you're an archaeologist? Cool. And they won't ask me the grave robber question. Now, as I'm walking along the back of the brick hotel here, I'm seeing quite a lot of equipment and mining features, but then also in the shrubbery, can you see it behind me? Over here, there's a truck. There's a truck. Not gonna lie, 5-year-old me is always about trucks because, well, trucks. See it? Oh man. Oh man. And it's an international. This is back before they made only corn binders. Gasoline tank still under the seat. Unsynchronized transmission. The fact that that dash cluster, that gauge still has glass in it is pretty amazing. Wooden steering wheel. This, I don't think this thing had turn signals. This is actually for your spark. So you could advance and retard the spark on your engine and helped essentially control RPM. You could drive it from the front or from the steering wheel without pedals. It's so small. It's so incredibly little. Seriously, I couldn't sit in this thing. Look at the size of my hand on that steering wheel. This might be for your headlights. What's it say? What's it say? I don't know. Spoked steel wheels. And look. So this is how you would take off your tire, is here at the rim. So this is very much like a wagon wheel. Here's another really good example. You would put this rim around here and bolt it down. And it was very similar to how the wagon wheels were on horse-drawn wagon. This truck is kind of the epitome of moving from horsepower to gas power. Man, I didn't know this was here. Hell, I had driven the 3 hours to this place simply for this truck. Oh, look at the shiny aluminum cap for the bearing. High praise. Now, one must ask, can the hood be opened? We shall see. Ooh. International flathead 4-cylinder engine. Probably a whopping 36 horsepower. Wow, look at the numbers. Look at the numbering. Look at the size of those spark plugs. Holy crap. Still got a V-belt on it. Got a engine-driven water pump and a generator with I guess that's the distributor there. Wow. Carburetor's gone. But God, this nameplate is gorgeous. Now, early on at its height in Bannack, there were 3,000 people living here. There's not enough buildings for 3,000 people, obviously. This whole hillside would have been covered with ramshackle, throw-em-up cabins. Very poor quality structures that were never meant to last very long. They were meant to keep you from freezing to death for a winter or two until you got rich and were able to pay your way out. I mean, there's Main Street right there. Where I'm standing would have been multiple buildings. Buildings lost to fire, buildings lost to collapse. Some of the buildings would have been salvaged for the construction and maintenance of other buildings. You know, during the Second World War, when gold wasn't a priority and you couldn't get fuel for your machinery, you couldn't get blasting material for breaking up the rock, gold mining was not a conducive thing anymore, at least for the war effort. And a lot of people would disappear to go to the war effort. And a lot of stuff like this would disappear too. Look, a piece of chain. Kind of amazing. A piece of chain. So all this mining equipment, look at these ore carts. Look at them. You got a narrow gauge trackway. Look at this, is an early ore cart with a wooden frame under it. Dredge buckets that would have operated in a chain hooked to a dredge, which we'll see in a little bit, which is a boat that floats in a pond and it eats its way along the channel of the creek, scooping up all of the sand and all of the sand and all of the soil that settles to the bottom, scoop it up and bring it into the machine where it would then be sifted. These are also dredge buckets, drag line buckets. You throw them in and you drag them across the bottom and they would scoop up ore and rocks, and then you would dump it out and wash it. This is an old electric generator. Now, this would have been hooked to a steam power plant, most likely, and it would have generated electricity via steam to run probably electric motors. And you would, in some cases, you would have heavy equipment that was electrically driven in the teens and 20s. This is a horse-drawn bucket or road grader. You put this behind your horse and you drag it, and it acts just like a belly dump when you see one of those out on a highway project. Here's another dredge bucket, dragline bucket. I don't know what that is. That is, dear Christ. Same with that. That looks like some sort of drill. Here's an impeller for washing. Big gear-driven sprocket that probably would have gone on the boiler or on the main steam drive of a dredge to run all of this equipment. Another very quickly, almost homemade looking dredge bucket. Is this a safe? This is a safe. Look at that. What's left of a safe. I get a kick out of this. So one of the things people got to remember is that during the 1940s, during America's entry into the Second World War, places like Bannack, while still inhabited, while still producing gold, had another resource that not a lot of people talk about. And it was definitely one of these resources that would disappear very quickly. And that is the resource of iron. What they would do is they would go to these mining operations and they would strip down, break down, and tear apart all of the old mining equipment for the war effort. Those dredge buckets and ore carts back there, very well, if someone didn't think to save them, would have become tank gun barrels and hulls for destroyer escorts and engine blocks and receivers for Garand rifles. There's a huge adventure into recycling during the Second World War out of fear of not being able to keep up with the needs of a wartime economy. So, like I said, Bannack and like Garnett, similar towns in Montana that were all based on gold. Like I said, gold wasn't a big deal during the Second World War. You can't use it for anything. Gold is just backs money, but it's not a resource that's usable. When you look at places like Butte, though, the mining in Butte never stopped because Butte has copper. Copper also exists with silver, which can back your money, and lead, which you need for obvious reasons. You make bullets out of lead. There's a black cat over there having a squirrel moment. I don't know if you guys can see her. If you go over next to that cabin, hunting rabbits. Good cat, good cat. So, during the war, you would have, this is a really old frame, board and batten house, really old. During the Second World War, you would need copper, you would need lead. Lead is a dry lubricant, for bearings, for bullets. Copper goes into brass, and there's all your shell casings. There's 4.3 miles of wiring, electrical wiring, in a P-51 Mustang fighter plane. 4-point-something miles. Now, you need copper for that, to make that wire, and that's one airplane. You know, how much do you think is in a B-24? I think we built 23,000 B-24s during the Second World War. How much wiring is in an aircraft carrier? We launched 36, I think, fleet aircraft carriers in the Second World War. So some materials, some minerals were worth mining. Gold wasn't one of them. So Bannack and like places like Garnett, they kind of dried up, mostly because the gold was not required for the economy. However, the iron in the machinery, that could be recycled. So there were places that saw whole mining operations broken down and stripped and sent away in an effort to feed the forges of industry during the Second World War. And in doing so, destroyed a lot of heritage. Destroyed things that were considered historically significant. There was a set of cannon in New England that were aboard the frigate Kearsarge, which sank the Confederate raider Alabama. And these cannons were set up as a monument to that ship and its crew. And during the Second World War, they were given over to the smelter for the war effort. And pieces of history destroyed, essentially to be a part of history, kind of thing. But Bannack, luckily, was not heavily hit by the scrappers, which is why there's such an overabundance of mining artifacts that still exist. Would you look at that? Can you imagine? Can you hear the swinging hammers? The picks, the steam engines, the stamp mills. Main Street. As a pagan archaeologist, I'm gonna have to show you something that pisses me off to no fucking end. This kind of shit. I get this is Jesus. I get you want to save lives and save souls. This is fucking vandalism, guys. And this is modern. This is modern. You know how I know it's modern? Because miners back then weren't that literate. You also know that it's vandalism when they put the date they were here. Come on, people. I love cheese, belch, cake, ruffle. I don't know why people fucking do this, kids, I guess. Here's a case in point for mixed construction, though. This is obviously modern, stabilizing. The inside of the walls are squared log. So the bones of this structure, the bones of this house, are very old indeed. This is for filling the gaps in the walls. This is a very, very, I don't even like saying the term, but this is called chinking. Yes, let's get over the fact that chinking in itself, the first word, is a profanity and a slur. But the material used, you stuff it in between the logs here, and then in this case they used pieces of wood to seal it up. Wedged it in there, tapped it in with nails, and sealed it up. And what that does is make your cabin somewhat weather tight. I hate the fact that it's called fucking chinking. Look at you! Hello. That really was the friendliest black cat I've ever met. She was quite insistent that we give her tummy rubbings. So you go up, I mean the whole area just, it's kind of surreal. It's kind of surreal. Here's what's left of another car. This is the back body. So, yeah, goes up into the back window. This is the rear body tub for probably something like a Model A sedan. There's a gas tank. Running boards. Or fairings. Yep, there's the front fairings right there. The hills are alive with the sound of miners. You can see here where they ducted their own water. This structure is obviously new, but it's at the point where there was a bridge before the water was made. Run down that ditch across to feed the infrastructure for the mines. This is a interesting artifact here. This is called a hole in cap can. It's square. So it was most likely, think of Spam, potted meat. This white is lead. This piece, so it's a two-piece lid. This lid goes on the top of the can. This is the hole down which you put stuff. So they would have put all of the stuff in this can through this big hole, and then they would have sealed it with lead. And then the center hole is the vent, and they would pasteurize it, suck all the air out, and then seal it with some more lead. And that's how you sanitized and canned food in the 18th century. As you no doubt can imagine, there are complications from lead. In fact, in the 1870s, when Bannack was going like gangbusters, there was a small town near the town of Garnett called Reynolds City. It was a place where several thousand people showed up for a very short period of time, like 6 months, because of the gold strike there. The one strike that was made was very rich for a very short period of time and was essentially used up by the number of people who showed up and strip mined that whole draw trying to find gold. There is a graveyard up there. Several graves that are still maintained, but there's certainly more people than there are markers. And one of the reasons for this is that there was a sickness, supposedly, that went through the town of Reynolds City and killed a bunch of people, and nobody knew what it was. Well, studies on cans found in that area show that they were all sealed with lead, and it became a theory that what these miners died of was botulism poisoning. Because if you put tomatoes in a can, tomato acid will compromise lead. So if you say you have a can of tomatoes sealed in lead, the tomato acid will eventually break that seal, causing the food to spoil and botulism to occur. And then, because you don't know any better, and it's on a microscopic level, the fails in the seals made out of lead, not only would your food be contaminated with lead breaking down in it, you'd be getting the botulism, and then you might die. So, what a way to go. More very heavy-duty wagon parts. This is the front drawbar of a really big wagon. You can see the sleeves there for the wagon wheels. This is the back half of it right here. There's 2 axles here. No doubt somebody found these somewhere close by and brought them into town. Back before there were restrictions on trying to protect the archaeological integrity of a site. Okay, here we go. Here's a great example. So you got debris, corrugated tin, stovepipe. There is, well kids, I'm standing on a car. There's the roof of a car, buried in the bank here. But you go up the hill into this little cabin. Not a bad little spot. See over the town. But it's a nice little cabin. Wallpaper was actually made out of cloth. And again, was less about decoration, was more about sealing the wind out. Got a root cellar behind me. But one of the things that people ask me, what happens to stuff? Was there a garbage truck? Nope. There wasn't. There's a massive can dump down there. And yeah, it's where you threw your stuff, just over the bank. Now, despite the fact that it is in fact just a pile of junk, this is one of those places that archaeologists love because love and hate, because it is potentially quite informative. It's also potentially a pain in the ass if you ever have to collect, curate, preserve any of this. Normally, can dumps don't get the same kind of treatment as, say, a midden from a Native American occupation or something like that. But you can tell a lot about the subsistence of people who lived on this ridgeline. Now, there's a house here that we were just at. But as you go along, there's cavities in the hillside all along that demark buildings that no longer exist. And this is where people dumped their cans. This is probably a communal spot. You got to remember, there's not a lot of packaging back then this time period. You have metal, you have glass. So there's a couple pieces of glass I saw. In fact, the sun has turned this green. It was originally clear. Other colors are amethyst, which I've talked about. Some of it turns like a sunflower yellow color. Others turn like aquamarine blue. But there's some glass. Here's another. That's actually like a drinking cup. What's left of a drinking cup. But you look at some of this, and you can tell what people were drinking. So again, thrusted through in the bottom, but this is what's called a hole in top. Not a hole in cap, but a hole in top. This was specifically for liquid. The little pinhole there covered in lead, that's how you would get the liquid in, and then you would seal it. This is a condensed milk can. There has been studies, lots of studies. There's actually quite an extensive database specifically on milk cans to help date these sites. This particular milk can is on the top, so it's the most recent. Hence, but punctured, tool punctures, most likely a nail or a punch of some sort. I've seen them opened with knives. I've seen them opened with quite possibly a hatchet. If this was something that had fruit or vegetation in it, it might have been opened in like an X. You cut across one way, cut across the other way, and then peel up the corners so it looks kind of like a four-leafed flower. Sizes and shapes of these cans can date the time period. So if we went to the bottom, we could find some tins that were smaller, and I could tell you where they came from based on measurements only. I mean, there's lots of milk cans, early sanitary can with crimped sides, knife opened, or like a little can opener opened. There's a coffee tin with the lid. Some of the bigger cans, most likely beans. That was probably a flour tin. You see the domed lid? That was probably for flour. And it goes all the way up the hill, all through the sagebrush. At this time, nobody's using plastics. Plastics really haven't been invented. The first plastic is called Bakelite, which appears sometime in the teens. But there's no plastic food waste. There's no plastic garbage. So as much as, you know, that can dump is very unsightly, and yeah, it's a trash heap, it's actually less damaging to the environment than the modern day trash that we generate every single day. But the interesting thing about cans is they're made out of metal. So again, if you're stuck up here and you've only got 3,000 people and the supply wagons can't get through, for say it's wintertime, say it's spring with runoff and flooding, if you needed to make a tool or you needed to make some sort of container, you could use a can. And there are artifacts, numerous artifacts that, I mean, I've found on projects that are repurposed, and it's repurposed archaeology or recycled archaeology. You can find a coffee can with a bunch of holes jammed in it. What is it? It's now a strainer. You know, they used to use cans as markers. You put something inside the can, seal it up with some wax. There's your claim marker with a document inside. You know, you could cut it apart into a square, use it to patch something. Yeah, can metal is not the most robust stuff in the world, but if it works in a pinch, and it's a 3-day horseback ride on a fast horse to the nearest place with like a hardware store or a big store or an active supply or a reliable, consistent supply route, you know, you make do with what you have. And that's what these people did quite often. This entire can here is sealed with lead down the side. I think it's a bread box, but it's also something that has been shot to shit. Oh, look, it's been embossed. Take some pictures. When it comes to old places like this, I can tell you there's 3 things that suffer the most at the hands of vandals. 1, buildings made out of wood, they burn pretty well. Windows with glass in them. Every small child in the world loves the breaking sound of glass, regardless of where you're from, what country you are, you know, what your gender identity or your ethnic background is. The sensation of chucking a small pebble through a pane of glass and watching it shatter just brings so much joy, chaos, and vandalism to us all. And most of the windows here in Bannack actually are reproductions because of the fact that, you know, these buildings stood empty for such a long time. People threw rocks through the windows just because that's what you do. Another thing that disappears quickly are bottles. And bottles disappear quickly because, well, people want to take them, you know, bottle hunting. And the same reason that intact cans like that bread box back there suffer. They make great targets. Don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not trying to encourage such vandalism. But, you know, people set up you see it in the old Western movies. You take some soup cans and you set them up on the fence there. And then you teach the hapless guy how to use a 6-shooter. People still do that today, and unfortunately I've come across you know, old cars in the woods and stuff like that, historically significant things, and it looks like they went through Baghdad because they are full from tip to tail with bullet holes ranging from 22 to 12 gauge to 30-06 and bigger. It's kind of sad. Here's one of the town cats. Looking to catch something. They no doubt help with the varmints, the rabbits and the gophers and small creatures that get into the structures and damage them, undermine foundations, and just in general disrupt the historical integrity of things. All that shimmers glitters gold. Nope. What's left of another eroding out of the hillside trash pit, which is in this case full of broken glass, bits of metal, some ceramic, and bone. Here's a bottle finish. Again, one of these places that, despite the fact it's a trash pit, you can't dig up. I'm pretty sure this structure behind me is the hooped top to like a covered wagon. I really don't know what else it could be. Who knows? God, I love the smell of the cottonwoods and the sage. It's fall here, and this is more picturesque of a fall than you know, the calendars that you get from the Daughters of the American Revolution of New England, of some stately house in New England surrounded by all these trees changing colors in the fall. Yeah. This is amazing here. I'm tickled pink. Tickled pink. Or that's from the sun, and I'm gonna die. And just in case you need to go, there you go. A two-holer. Garnett, Montana is actually infamous for having the only known three-hole outhouse in the state that still exists. Glorious things to be famous for, I suppose. One of these beautiful stoves. I don't know what this is, but it's made out of galvanized cast aluminum. I don't know. God. Never gets old. You know, this was a barn, piece of a wagon, even though it looks suspiciously like a grave marker. The grave, the tombs are up on the top of the hill. We might go there here in a bit. Linoleum. Linoleum. Look, guys. This house has a relatively modern kitchen. This is actually one of the more modern houses in town, I believe. With linoleum, multiple layers of wallpaper. You can see the lath and plaster is failing there and there. This house is probably built in around 1900. Christy Hart's Larry Jr. Yeah, well, they're assholes. And like I said before, stuff like this is what's going to get these places closed so people can't go inside them. This is half the experience. The fact that I'm even able to be in here is kind of amazing. And people are ruining it because they feel like this sort of behavior isn't damaging. But it is, because that can't be repaired. You can't paint over that. You can't redo this section of wall. They don't make this material anymore. So this is now permanent, and it damages our cultural resources. And that's what Bannack is. Bannack is one of these places that is protected under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which is the thing that I keep going on about in my social media. Well, there's an example of violating it right there. Vandalism. Well, you guys wanted haunted. Here's haunted. So earlier, when I was in the graveyard, I noticed a number of tombstones with the surname of Bassett. And this is the Bassett house. As you can see, the walls are squared log again. It's one of the oldest houses in town. And as I'm walking across the floor, it bounces. There's no support. So I'm genuinely afraid I'm gonna fall through the floor here. As you can see, more vandalism on the walls because people suck. But one of the things that you need to know about this house is that this house, especially, and this takes kind of an interesting precedent today in this day and age. This house was used to quarantine people for scarlet fever and Spanish flu and whooping cough and all of these diseases that killed people back then. So here we are at the height of COVID in 2020. I'm standing in a house that was used to quarantine people for the Spanish flu, which was the equivalent of COVID in 1919. Naturally, those diseases kill people. And this is supposed to be one of the most haunted places in Bannack. Now, no one's told me the ghost stories. I've had to do some reading of my own. I haven't heard anything about this particular house, but doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's amazing how ornate these old stoves are. This is kind of a quick trip, unfortunately. I could be here all day. I could be here for days looking at these structures, learning the history, learning more about the history, seeing the artifacts. I could live here. I could work here for the rest of my life. So yeah, as I leave Bannack, I just can't help but enjoy the fact that I'm here in autumn, in the waning days of this year, dealing with ghosts of an age that's long past, but not that long. Hope you guys had fun. This was great. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. And yeah, maybe I'll bring a proper camera next time and actually film properly.